Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Today's readings will be from Autobiography of Phra Ajaan, one selected reading, and then a variety of smaller little excerpts from the teachings of Phra Ajaan, Volume 2, as translated by Ajahn Jeff. I make it a practice to wander about during the dry season every year. I do this because I feel that a monk who stays put in one monastery is like a train sitting still at Hua Lumpang station, and everybody knows the worth of a train sitting still. So there's no way I could stay in one place. I'll have to keep on the move all my life as long as I'm still ordained. Some of my companions have criticized me for being this way. Others have praised me. But I myself feel that it brings nothing but good. I've learned about the land, events, customs, and religious practices in different places. In some places, it may be that I'm more ignorant than the people there. In other places, and with other groups, it might be that I know more than they. So there's no way that I can lose by traveling about. Even if I just sit still in the forest, I gain by it. Whether I find that the people know less than I do, I can be their teacher. In whatever groups I find that I know less than they do, I'm willing to be their student. Either way, I profit. At the same time, living in the forest, as I like to do, has given me a lot to think about. One, it was a custom of the Buddha. He was born in the forest, attained awakening in the forest, and totally entered Nibbana in the forest. And yet, how was he at the same time able to bring his virtues right into the middle of great cities, as when he spread his religious work to include King Bimbisara of Rajagaha? Two, as I see it, it's better to evade than to fight. As long as I'm not superhuman, as long as my skin can't ward off knives, bullets, and spears, I better not live in the centers of human society. This is the way I feel. It's better to evade than to fight. People who know how to evade have a saying, to evade is wings, to avoid is a tail. This means a teeny chick, fresh out of the egg, if it knows how to evade, won't die. It will have a chance to grow feathers and wings and be able to survive on its own in the future. To avoid is a tail. This refers the tail, rudder, of a boat. If a person holding the rudder knows how to steer, he'll be able to avoid stumps and sandbars. For the boat to avoid running aground depends on the rudder. Because this is the way I see things, I prefer to live in the forest. 3. I've come to consider the principles of nature. It's quiet. It's a quiet place where you can observe the influences of the environment. Wild animals, for example, sleep differently from domesticated animals. This can be a good lesson. Or take the wild rooster. Its eyes are quick, its tail feathers sparse, its wings strong, and its call short. It can run fast and fly far. What do these characteristics come from? I've made this a lesson for myself. Domesticated roosters and wild roosters come from the same species, but the domesticated rooster's wings are weak, its call long, its tail feathers lush and ungainly, its behavior different from that of the wild rooster. The wild rooster is the way it is because it can't afford to let down its guard. It always has to be on the alert because danger is ever present in the forest. If the wild rooster went around acting like a domestic rooster, the cobras, the mongooses would make a meal of it in no time. So when it eats, sleeps, opens and closes its eyes, the wild rooster has to be strong and resilient in order to stay alive. So it is with us. If we spend all of our time wallowing around in companionship, we're like a knife or a hoe stuck into the ground, into the dirt. It'll rust easily. But if it's constantly sharpened on a stone or file, rust won't have a chance to take hold. Thus we should learn to always be on the alert. This is why I'd like to stay in the forest. I benefit from it and I learn many lessons. 4. I've learned to reflect on the teachings that the Buddha taught. First, to each newly ordained monk. They're very thought-provoking. He taught the Dhamma first, then the Vinaya. He'd begin with the virtues of Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, followed by the 5 basic objects of meditation: hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, and skin. Then he'd give a sermon with 4 major points. A, make a practice of going out for alms. Be an asker, but not a beggar. Be content with whatever you are given. B, live in a quiet place, such as an abandoned house under a projecting cliff face in a cave. People have asked if the Buddha had any reasons for this teaching, but I've always been convinced that if there were no benefits to be gained from these places, he wouldn't have recommended them. Still, I wondered what these benefits were, which is why I've taken an interest in this matter. C, the Buddha taught monks to make robes from cloth that had been thrown away, even to the point of wearing robes made from cloth used to wrap a corpse. This teaching made me reflect on death. What benefits could come from wearing cloth what benefit could come from wearing cloth used to wrap a corpse? For a single answer, think for a moment about a corpse's things. They don't appeal to anyone. No one wants them, and so they hold no dangers. In this point, it's easy enough to see that the Buddha taught us not to take pride in our possessions. D, the Buddha taught that we should use medicines near at hand, such as medicinal plants pickled in urine. These teachings of the Buddha, when I first heard them, sparked my curiosity. Whether or not I would benefit from following them, there was one thing I was sure of. The Buddha was not the sort of person who would hold blindly to anything, and that he would never teach anything without good reason. So even if I wasn't totally convinced of his teachings, I should at least respect them. Or if I didn't have any confidence in my teacher's abilities, I owed it to him and to the traditions of the Sangha to give his teachings a try. I was reminded of the words of Mahakassapa, who asked to be allowed to follow such ascetic practices as living in the forest, eating 1 meal a day, going out for alms, and wearing robes made from thrown-away rags all his life. The Buddha questioned him, You've already eradicated your defilements. What is there left for you to strive for? Mahakassapa answered, I want to observe these practices not for my own sake, but for the sake of those yet to come. If I don't follow these practices, who will they be able to take as an example? If a person teaches by example, the students will learn easily, just as when a person teaches students how to read. If he has pictures to go along with the text, the students will learn more quickly. My observing these practices is the same sort of thing. When I thought of these words, I felt sympathy for Mahakassapa, subjecting himself to all sorts of hardships. If you were to put it in worldly terms, you could say that he was already a multimillionaire, deserving a soft bed and fine food, but instead he slept and ate on the ground and had only coarse food to eat. Thinking of his example, I'd be ashamed to look for nothing more than creature comforts. As for Mahakassapa, he could have eaten fine food and lived in a beautiful home with no danger of his heart being defiled. But, and it's not surprising, he was more concerned with the benefits of those who came after. All these things have given me food for thought ever since I was first ordained. Speaking of living in the forest, I've learned a lot of unusual lessons there. Sometimes I've seen death close at hand, and I've learned a lot of lessons. sometimes from seeing the behavior of animals, sometimes from talking to people who live there. Once there was an old man who told me of the time he had gone with his wife to tap tree sap deep in a large forest. They happened to run into a bear, and a fight ensued. The wife was able to get up a tree in time and then called down to her husband, if you can't fight it off, lie down and play dead. Don't make a move. When her husband heard this, he came to his senses and so fell back on the ground, lying absolutely still. Seeing this, the bear climbed up astride him, but then let go of him and simply stood looking at him. The old man lay there on his back, meditating on the word Buddho, Buddho, and thinking, I'm not going to die, I'm not going to die. The bear pulled at his leg, and then at his head, and then used its muzzle to push him over and push him and left him, and then used its muzzle to push him left and then right. The old man kept his joints loose and didn't react in any way. After the bear decided that the man was dead, it left. A moment or so later, the man got up and walked home with his wife. His head was battered and bloody, but he hadn't died. When he finished telling me the story, he added, that's the way forest animals have to be. If you can't fight, you have to play dead. Hearing this, the thought occurred to me, no one is interested in a dead person. Because I live in the forest, I should play dead. Whoever praises me or attacks me, I'll have to be still, quiet in thought, word, and deed. If I want to survive, this can also be a good reminder in the way of the Dhamma. To free yourself from death, you have to play dead. This is a good lesson in Maranasati, keeping death in mind. Another time, one morning, when I was staying in the middle of a large forest, I took my followers out for alms. As we were going through the forest, I heard a mother chicken cry, "Katak, katak." Because she didn't fly away, I figured she probably had some chicks. So I sent the boys to run and look. This frightened the chicken and she flew away over the trees. The boys saw a lot of baby chicks running around, but before they could catch them, the chicks scurried into a large pile of fallen leaves. There they hid themselves and laid absolutely still. The boys took a stick and stirred around in the leaves, but the chicks didn't move. They didn't even make a peep. Although the boys kept looking for a while, they couldn't find even a single chick. I knew that those chicks hadn't gone anywhere. They had just pretended to be fallen leaves. So as it turned out, of all those little teeny chicks, we couldn't catch a one. Thinking about this, I was struck by their instincts for self-preservation and how clever they were. They simply kept themselves quiet in a pile of fallen leaves, and so I made a comparison for myself. When you're in the wilds, then if you can keep your mind still like the baby chicks, you're sure to be safe and free yourself from dying. This is another good lesson. In addition to the animals, there are other aspects of nature, such as trees and vines, that can set you thinking. Take vines, for instance. There are some that don't turn in any direction but right. Observing this, I made it a lesson for myself. If you're going to take your mind to the highest good, you have to act like the vines, always to the right. For the Buddha taught, Kaya kamang, vacha kamang, mano kamang, padidikang. Going to the right in thought, word, and deed, you'll always have to go right by keeping yourself above the defilements that flare up and consume the heart. Otherwise, you'll be no match, even for a vine. Some kinds of trees make themselves quiet in ways we can see. We say that they sleep. At night, they fold up their leaves. If you go lie under them, you'll have a clear view of the stars in the nighttime sky. But when the day comes, they spread out their leaves and give a dense shade. This is a good lesson for the mind. When you sit in meditation, close only your eyes. Keep your mind bright and alert. like a tree that closes its leaves and thus doesn't obscure our view of the stars. When you think in this way, you see the value of living in the forest. The mind becomes confident. Dhamma that you have studied, or even that you haven't, will make itself clear, because nature is the teacher. It's like the sciences of the world, which every country has used to develop amazing powers. None of their inventions or discoveries came out of a textbook. They came because scientists studied the principles of nature, all of which appear right here in the world. As for the Dhamma, it's just like science. It exists in nature. When I realized this, I no longer worried about studying the scriptures and was reminded of the Buddha and his disciples. They studied and learned from the principles of nature. None of them followed a textbook. For these reasons, I'm willing to be ignorant when it comes to the texts and scriptures. Some kinds of trees sleep at night and are awake during the day. Others sleep by day and are awake by night. The same is true of the forest animals. Living in the forest, you also learn from the vapors that each plant exudes. Some plants are good for your health, some are bad. Sometimes, for example, when I've been feverish, I've gone to sit under certain kinds of trees and my fever has disappeared. Sometimes when I've been feeling well and I've gone to sit under certain kinds of trees and the elements in my body became disturbed. Sometimes I've been hungry and thirsty, but as soon as I go to sit under certain kinds of trees, my hunger and thirst disappear. Learning from trees in this way has caused me to think about the traditional doctors who keep a statue of a hermit on their altars. Those hermits never studied medical textbooks, but were able to teach about medicines that can cure disease because they had studied nature by training their minds the same way we do. Similar lessons can be learned from water, earth, and air. Realizing this, I've never gotten very excited about medicines that cure disease because I felt that the good medicines are everywhere. The important point is whether or not we recognize them, and this depends on us. In addition, there is another quality we need in order to take care of ourselves, the power of the mind. If we are able to keep the mind quiet, its ability to cure disease will be tens of times greater than that of any medicine. This is called Dhamma Osata, the medicine of the Dhamma. All in all, I can really see that I've gained from living in the forest and other quiet places in order to train the mind. One by one, I've been able to cut away my doubts about the Buddha's teachings, and so for this reason, I'm willing to devote myself to the duties of meditation until there's no more life left for me to live. The gains that come from training the mind, if I were to describe them in detail, would go on and on, but I'll ask to finish this short description here. I'll read a few bits from here. This is on the chapter called Fragments. It's a lot of short teachings. This section is the basics of breathing. I'll pause just for a moment in between each short teaching. When the body is still, you gain knowledge from the body. When the mind is still, you gain knowledge from the mind. When the breath is still, you gain knowledge from the breath. Ordinary everyday breathing doesn't do anything special for you except keep you from dying. The breathing on which your awareness is intent can give rise to all kinds of good things. Ordinary breathing is the breath of suffering and stress. In other words, when it comes in, it reaches a point of discomfort, so it has to go back out. When it goes out, it runs into discomfort again, so it comes back in. This kind of breathing isn't called meditation. Meditation means gathering all your awareness into the mind. Don't put pressure on the breath. Force it or hold it. Let it flow easily and comfortably, as when you put a fresh egg into a cotton batting. If you don't throw it or push it down, the egg won't get dented or cracked. This way your meditation will progress smoothly. If the mind isn't yet still, just watch the in and out breath without trying to notice whether it's comfortable or not. Otherwise, the mind will start to stray. It's like a farmer planting an orchard. If he mows down too much grass all at once, he won't be able to plant all his trees in time, and the grass will start growing again. He has to mow down just enough area that he can plant it all in one day. That's how he'll get the results he wants. Whether or not the breath is even, you have to keep your mindfulness even. The breath is like waves. Mindfulness is like a boat. The mind is like a person sitting in the boat. If the waves of the breath aren't still, the boat will tip over, and the person in the boat will die or suffer hardships. You have to make your mind still like a boat that has cast its anchor in the middle of the sea when there's no wind or waves. The boat doesn't tip, and the person in the boat, your mind, is quiet, still, and at ease. This is the mind on the noble path. It's a free mind with full power beyond the sway of the hindrances. Make your mind like a train running along the track. The breath is the track, the mind is the train, and mindfulness is the conductor driving the train. You have to make sure that the conductor isn't drunk on alcohol, and he's intent on driving the train well, so it goes straight down the track. When the train goes smoothly up and down the track without any hitches, the results are that you earn money from carrying passengers and freight. The money stands for inner worth and skillfulness. The passengers are the 4 jhanas, which will benefit the mind. The freight stands for the fullness of the physical properties, which will benefit the body. The breath in the body isn't limited just to the breath that flows in and out the nose. The breath in the body spreads out to every pore, like vapor that gets exhaled from an ice cube, much more refined than outside air. When the internal breath goes out the pores, it gets reflected back into the body. This breath is called the supporting breath. It helps keep the body and mind cool and still. So when you breathe in, let the breath fill the inside of your body. When you breathe out, let it spread out in all directions. The factors of jhana, directed thought, evaluation, rapture, and pleasure, all have to be gathered at the breath if you want to reach singleness of preoccupation. Directed thought is like laying claim to a piece of land. Evaluation is like planting it with seed. When the seed bears fruit, that's rapture and pleasure. Keeping awareness with the breath is directed thought. Knowing the characteristics of the breath is evaluation. Spreading the breath so that it permeates and fills the entire body is rapture. The sense of serenity and well-being in the body and mind is pleasure. When the mind is freed from the hindrances so that it's one with the breath, that's singleness of preoccupation. All of these factors of jhana turn mindfulness into a factor for awakening. One of the benefits from working with the breath is that the properties of the body become friendly and harmonious with one another. We spread the breath all over the body, and then when it grows still, it gives you a sense of physical seclusion. This is one of the physical benefits. As for the mental benefits, mindfulness becomes enlarged. When mindfulness is enlarged, awareness is enlarged. The mind becomes an adult and doesn't go sneaking off like an ordinary mind. If you want to think, it thinks. If you want it to stop, it stops. If you want it to go, it goes. When the mind is well trained, it gains knowledge, like an educated adult. When you converse with it, you understand each other. The mind of a person who hasn't trained it is like a child. This kind of mind doesn't understand what you say and likes to slip off and roam around, and it goes without saying goodbye. You have no idea what it takes with it when it goes or what it brings back when it returns. When the mind is in concentration, it doesn't get distracted by any thoughts that come passing by. It's like a person entirely focused on his work. If anybody walks by and tries to strike up a conversation, he doesn't want to respond or even look up from his work. In the same way, when the mind has really cut away its outside preoccupations, it's bound to stay entirely in the object of its meditation. When you keep the breath in mind, you get all four frames of reference in one. The breath is the body, feelings lie in the body, the mind lies in the body, and mental qualities lie in the mind. The four frames of reference when we sit in meditation: the breath is the body, comfort and discomfort are feeling, purity and clarity are states of mind, and steadiness of mind is mental quality. And then a short bit that comes from teaching. When I'm in Bangkok, everyone who comes to my quarters sits still and meditates. Not because I tell them to, but because that's what I'm doing myself. That in and of itself is enough to teach them. I sit with my eyes closed. When they see me sitting with my eyes closed, they sit with their eyes closed as well and don't dare say anything. If I were to get involved in their issues, they'd get involved in mine. Yeah, Lungpa, did Ajahn Chah and Ajahn Lee cross paths back in the day?
Not that I know of. They're slightly different generation. Ajahn Lee was a bit older, and and then he also spent quite a bit of time toward the end of his life in where his monastery, Samutprakan, outside of Bangkok, and then he was in Chantaburi before that. So along that east and south of Bangkok. So I think just geographically they never really crossed paths, even though they're, again, a lot of, as is with many of these forest masters, they're from Ubon, Tampoli is from Ubon originally. But yeah, I've never heard of the crossing paths. In terms of style of teaching and kind of ability to, have a rich imagery and similes, and Ajahn Lee and Ajahn Chah had quite a similar style. It was one of the reasons I think that, say, Ajahn Jeff was really keen on translating. He translated several of Ajahn Chah's talks and teachings. There's a freshness to the style. It's quite interesting.
Really appreciating more than before how well Ajahn Lee's autobiography reads, not just as a Buddhist book for Buddhists, but as a book. Mm. And it kind of strikes me as like it might be a good book to read for like a beginner, or somebody new to Buddhism, because it's not preachy, and like Ajahn Jeff mentions, I think in the introduction, a lot of the teachings are sort of implied, and I think it, at least for me, sheds a very positive light on like the lifestyle, I guess, of the forest monk.
Quite practical. I love the one where you're supposed to go on some trip and they show up at the train station and all of his porters have all this stuff, and he walks from one train station to the other train station until he get tired of getting all their stuff, and then they get on the train.
That was a very, very direct teaching without saying anything. He said, "Okay, how much stuff you got?" He didn't berate anybody. He didn't belittle them. Didn't make fun of them. Just start walking. It becomes clear pretty quickly. God, I got too much stuff.